Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Severance Season 2, Episode 6. It's called Attila. So spoilers for the episode. And I had to think about the title there for a second, because I already recorded this review, only to find that my mic settings had been altered on when my computer restarted, and the entire 30 minutes, I didn't quite finish it, I was near the end, but I lost all of it, so I'm frustrated, so you're going to get a spicier tone during this version. Anyway, this was a great episode. It was great, right? I have many nice things to say about this. I have a lot of thoughts. There's some nice teasing, surprising teasing even, about Lumen secrets that comes from the Burt dinner with his husband Fields, with Irving. And there's wonderful stuff happening with the rest of the characters. And the theme of this episode very much is relationships, if not specifically sex itself. So we're going to get into all that. First things first, let's just talk about Mark and Helly and all that stuff. Although, to start with, the very first scene of the episode, I really appreciated this, is that Mark what's her name? Zal. Sorry, in my head I just think Doctor Lady every time she pops up, because I feel like they never say her name, so it never sinks in. But she and him are talking about what the end of the last episode was, and discussing what he heard his wife say. You know what Jem is saying, all these facts she's spouting out, and being confused by it. Like, what is this? What's going on? And all that she can say is, well, I know she's pivotal to whatever's going on. And we know that's true, of course. But I really appreciated this because it's such a stark contrast to the end of episode 3, where reintegration started, get into the mountain episode, where the mountain episode, part of my frustration with that is it just felt like it just felt like something was missing. Like they skipped over something. And it was a little bit better in hindsight once episode 5 cleared it up a little, but I think I really appreciated that this immediately addressed his thoughts on what he saw, right? Because I think they've kind of retroactively said, I mean, I think Iselle even has a line here where she says, hey, this is better, this is a recent memory, it's not just waking up on a table. So they've kind of retroactively said, yeah, that's all he remembered at the end of that episode was waking up on a table. Which, at the time, it felt like a bigger thing. And maybe that was like, it was a great cliffhanger, but maybe in hindsight, it was maybe setting up too much expectations for what it actually was in the moment. I could be wrong. But anyway, so I really like the opening scene, but all the juicy stuff is once we're in the office, and there's some stuff with Dylan admitting that he found that map and the red door stuff and all that, which they talk about briefly, but that's really not the meat of this. Dylan's got his own thing we'll get to in a bit, but Mark and Helly, as well as outie Mark and Helena, have, I think, 2 of the best scenes of the season so far between them. It's really great stuff. I love that Mark, not wanting the whole secret that Milchick has over him to linger, and not just because it could be used for blackmail. I think Mark just would actually want to tell Helly about what happened with Helena. And everything with, Britt lore is just continuously showing why she should get some awards for this season. And I think this episode's a great example, because we get the extremes of both sides of Helly and Helena. But here, her reacting to this, and like the confusion at first of like, wait, sex? You mean with Miss Casey? Like a counseling thing? And he's like, no, it was in the tents. It was, it was on the mountain, blah, blah, blah. And him trying to comfort her, but her not really being able to take it in, and walking off. And she sort of cries in the corner of a hallway like a teenager almost. But does remember and thinks about Mark and like the kiss from season 1. And clearly is processing her feelings on this. And Mark also is sitting very sad in his office, or in I say office, their workspace, the refining area, if you will. So, what I loved about this, once they get back together, and once they find each other, they're looking for each other, is the series of exchanges they have here is just kind of what my love of this show is. It's the exploration of this new frontier, of this weird ethical dilemma of how do we actually navigate through a complex interpersonal relationship that is muddied by innies and outies and the rights of one versus the other. Because Helly very quickly in this scene says, hey, you thought it was me, And that means you wanted to do it with me. And there's a little moment where Mark agrees with that and nods back at her. And then she sort of reveals what she's really upset about is that she got to have that. She got to have that memory. She tricked her friend into having it. And she complains that her outie dresses her like a baby. She's like, I hate her. I hate my outie. That is effectively the scene, or this part of the conversation. And what I love here is Mark clearly thinking about, okay, what is the right thing to do here? What is the right thing to do in this complex situation that we have found ourselves in? And I think what he comes up with and offers does make a lot of sense. And I think some people in this situation would want what he offers. Helly doesn't, right? She it turns out that that's not what she wants. But what he offers does make some sense, because he says, hey, do you want me to tell you exactly everything that happened? Because it was your body, you have a right to know. And she says, no, I don't want that. That's her memory. I want my own memory. And that's when it kind of pivots to, I want to have sex. And he's like, yeah, I want that too. And they go find a place, and it's sweet and all that. But I think I like that is that I think what he offers makes complete sense. And I think some people would want that. They would want to know what was done with their body. But some people wouldn't want to know. They'd be like, no, that's another person. I want my own experiences. Both of it makes sense. And I think it just shows to me a good exploration of how different people will react. In the same way that even just sex in general, different people want slightly different things. Sometimes some people want extremely different things. Some people have different limits, different kinks, whatever. Like go down the gauntlet of sexual interests, right? There's a ton of weird things people like. Some stuff that's not so weird. Everyone's different with this stuff. And not that this is even specifically a sex debate or talk necessarily. Like this could be about anything else that was violating, really. But them just trying to like figure out how do we move forward with this, and ultimately they move forward just because they listen to each other, because they try and understand how the other person's feeling, and they reach something amicable. Very amicable. Having sex is, the most amicable two people can be with each other, assuming all consent is given. So she takes his hand. They go find a room. They find a room that has like plastic tarps all over all the computer desks, and she says, hey, we can make a tent. And they go into a tent. And I think what's so great about this is not just that it's happening and that it's this kind of sweet culmination that, again, much like reintegration happening, it feels like it's almost a little bit sooner than I think we'd expect, but it feels in a weird way that because the thing with Helena happened, it makes sense that it would feel a little bit like, hey, no, we should do this now, because clearly like these feelings are here, we have to address them, and I kind of really appreciate that. But my favorite thing about the scene is just how much it contrasts with the sex scene that he had with Helena, because that scene had this kind of, it was a little romantic in a way, but it was very moody, it was very dark, and it very much felt like, yeah, in hindsight, or even for the audience really, because we'd all figured out that it was really Helena, it felt like a little dark because there was a manipulation element here. There was some strings being pulled that he isn't aware of. And the body language was very different. Here, there's an innocence to it. It's actually kind of awkward, but in like a nice awkward, like this is like a first time exploration where it's almost like they're two young people like figuring out where to put their hands kind of thing. It's sweet. Now, obviously, Mark here's had at least one go round to have a bit of experience. But I was joking back in the Mountain episode that, yeah, like, how many innies have actually had sex, technically? Probably not that many. I'm sure a couple of people, a couple of couples here or there have done this in the office like these two are doing now, but it can't be that big a number, relatively speaking. I think it's a really sweet culmination of their relationship, and then it even leads to some fun stuff afterwards. Like when he gets the nosebleed, one, I love that he thinks she's got a nosebleed because they were kissing, and even the fact that they were kissing because she tried to ask, hey, was it different to her, and he just answers by kissing her. Like, it's like, no, there's no awkwardness here. Like, I feel romance, so have kiss. But Miss Hong, of course, is investigating this nosebleed and giving him some first aid. and he's asking about other, other symptoms. And he is, saying he doesn't have any other things. And of course he does, because he had that flash earlier on where he saw his living room and his own fridge and kitchen instead of the work kitchen. So he is having these weird moments, these weird episodes. But he at least thinks on his feet and decides to lie that he's not having them. Because presumably, they probably would know the various symptoms of reintegration. So it's something that he's going to have to be careful about. But I loved the line. I mean, aside from Miss Hong asking, what were you doing when this happened in the refining stuff? That was a great line from Helly. But my favorite line by far is, did you punch him? And Helly responded with, not today. That's a good line. That's a good answer to that question. So all this is great. And a nice little touch here as well is that typically we'll, if we transition from the innies to the outies for the back half of the episode, we'll often see Mark or maybe one of the others leaving the office kind of thing, or at least going to the elevator to kind of just be a nice little break to say, hey, we're in outie time now. Not always, but sometimes. It's kind of nice that they have this new thing they can do where they basically have Mark, outie Mark that is remembering some of these moments, so they sort of flicker to outie Mark, and then we stay on the outside with the outies from that point in the episode. I think that's really cool. I think that's a nice little just shake up of how to do that transition between the two sides of the story. But he gets frustrated here because it's going slow, reintegration's taking a long time, and he kind of storms off after Izal suggests that they do something kind of risky that might give him a brain hemorrhage. So he's like, no, F that, I'm going to eat, I'm starving, which apparently is one of the symptoms of reintegration. And it's when he's at a restaurant and he's devoured some food that Helena walks in and sits at a booth down the row and just kind of stares and smells at him over the booth, and eventually comes over and introduces herself and says, hey, you're Mark. You work at Lumen. Do you know who I am? And he does, which I actually really like that he does have an awareness of who she is. And it makes me love that they did this before he starts seeing her properly from remembering her. Because this would have played very differently if Mark had started to have proper memories of Helly. Very different dynamic. And we still get to have that later, which is great. But something else I want to say here is I want to celebrate the medium of television with this scene, because the impact that her just walking into this scene has is so big purely because this is TV, because we have spent so much time with these characters and we have so much backstory at this point in context for what it means that Helena is now approaching Mark on the outside, something that they've not done before. And how all the baggage that they have in various ways between innies and outies. And that's partly the beauty of science fiction, of course, because that's a lot of science fiction concepts. But this wouldn't have the same impact 2 or 3 episodes in. If they had done this, if they had bumped into each other in episode 3 of season 1, it would have been a fine thing, and it would have been something that maybe would start to develop the story depending on where they wanted to go. But this here felt like for a viewer, for the audience, it felt like the meteor is landing, because we're going in a fascinating new direction. And it reminds me of the start of the season, because their whole excuse for Miss Cobell was that she was obsessed with Mark and wanted some kind of throuple with the innie and outie. And it kind of feels like that was foreshadowing this, because Helena is kind of here to speak to Mark, possibly just as outright stalking him. And I think you could ask the question, and it's valid to ask, is she here for company reasons, or is she here for personal reasons? And frankly, I would lean towards personal. Now, it could be a bit of both. It could be a little of column A and a lot of column B. But I do think it leans towards personal. I think this is her wanting to get close to him and kind of explore this. Now that she's cut off from any Mark, this is the option she has, is to go after outie Mark. And this is a wonderful scene. I mean, the performances from both of them are great here. Like I said, Britt is doing a fantastic job of differentiating between Helly and Helena. There's a great moment from Adam Scott here where he kind of transitions between two moods later in the scene, which I'll talk about. But I love this scene. This scene is phenomenal for a couple of reasons. But I love how complex it is for all the backstory that I've already said we've went into it with. But how complex it is from an audience, like the audience's perspective in engaging with the scene. And what I mean by that is that as the scene starts and she starts talking to him about working at the company, he makes a severance joke and she kind of laughs at it. And then she mentions her father and saying, hey, you should meet him. And they do a little bit for like a few lines back and forth where they're joking about like, oh, she's taking him home to meet her dad. And that's, you know, a lot of pressure. Yeah, you know, they crack a few jokes back and forth and being a little sarcastic. One, obviously, there's the kind of creepy irony that she does kind of not want to meet her dad, but like that she is interested in some kind of relationship, and she's coming into this scene with more knowledge than him. Now, even though he knows who she is on the outside, this is still very similar to the inside, where she was pretending to be Helly. It's just as manipulative to me, because she's approaching him with all this knowledge and all this intention. And she's literally had sex with him. she's known him on a biblical level, if you will, and he doesn't know that. So this feels really manipulative and creepy in a very similar way to Helly, or pretending to be Helly on the inside. But more so than that is this idea that they actually kind of hit it off here. They have chemistry. And I think for the audience watching that feels kind of gross. But at the same time, you have to admit that it makes sense that they have chemistry. Because if any Mark and Helly have chemistry, then the two outies still have some of them in. And obviously Helly and Helena are the most different, right? Because what I've been talking about since the start of the show is the idea that the innies are kind of like the outies, but with all the baggage stripped away so they can be the most pure version of them. And Helena has the most baggage and weirdest upbringing and pressured, weird life compared to anyone else, it seems like. So it makes sense that hers is a lot further removed, but there is something in the center there that does connect with Mark here, and it feels like they have chemistry, they're hitting it off, and I think we as the audience recognize that and feel a little gross about it because it feels wrong. But the other thing I love about this scene is that I won't say he forgot about his wife during this scene, or that he forgot like what he was doing earlier, what his motivation was. But this entire scene ultimately does re-motivate him to go back to Giselle and say, do the procedure, I need this done. But I love in the scene itself how it happens, because while she does say more manipulative things as she goes on, and by getting the name wrong and saying Hannah instead of Gemma, as soon as she says something that would be completely accepted in normal conversation, which is, oh, I was so sorry to hear about your wife. The second she says that, any chemistry, any like feelings that might have been building an initial kind of attraction, meet cute kind of way, they plummet. They plummet because she is just reminding him what the company he works for is doing, right? She is reminding him that the company have his wife, who he believed was dead, is actually alive, at least as far as he knows and understands right now. Right? He even said that at the start of the episode. He said, hey, people try to bargain with themselves that, hey, maybe if I changed who I am and do the things differently, I could get the person back. But in his case, he might actually get it. He might actually get his wife back. That's just an interesting thought process in the first place. But specifically, Lumen have done this to him. And the second she brings up the wife, Mark's eyes change dramatically. Not just because he's been reminded. I phrased it that way, but it's because all of a sudden, I think he internally is questioning, why is she here? Given that Miss Coble was right next door spying on him, given all the other weird, creepy little things that have happened with the overtime, which she brings up as well, it feels like this company thing all of a sudden. It feels like she is prodding, and at the very least, as soon as she brings up the wife, he's clearly thinking, she's alive. You know things, and you've been helping keep these things from me. You're a villain to me. And there's a remotivation here of determination to go back and try and remember to find his wife, because this is more manipulation. And I guess, as much as there was a little bit of an attraction and some chemistry happening in this scene, ultimately, outie Mark has enough knowledge that any Mark doesn't have to realize that it's manipulation. at a certain point, and the firewall goes up, and he's able to dart off. Now, she does see him cough as well, which is maybe worth mentioning, because I do wonder if Helena is going to figure out that he's reintegrating and then use that in some way against him and not tell the company, because I think she's going to start doing things for herself and be all secretive and whatnot. But this scene was phenomenal, start to finish. The ups and downs of it, the chemistry of it happening, and like, oh, they actually kind of might like each other even on the outside. Boom, mentioned the wife. Oh yeah, Lumen's doing all this to me, and you represent that. You're a part of that. I can't trust you. All that's good stuff. And how is that going to make him feel when he remembers Helly? Like, when Outie Mark starts to remember Helly, how do those memories and how he feels about Helena on the outside start to intermingle? Like, what does he think about that? How does he process that? And that's some of the most fascinating things that I'm excited to get to with these plot lines. So, wonderful stuff. Mark, of course, goes back and gets he's got a big hole in his skull that was there from when they put the implant in, and it's a pretty big hole. I don't feel like you should have holes in your skull. Well, other than your eye sockets and whatnot. The ones that are meant to be there are fine. But it's the extra hole that he's got is not so good. But yeah, he does have like a freak out moment, of course. He does kind of start to see his wife, but also Helly, in his flashes. But he sort of freaks out and says, "What was that?" And Azelle tries to say, "Hey, don't move, you can't be moving." But the door's going, it's his sister, Devon's here. And he's like, "Hey, she knows I'm here, I can't just ignore her." So he goes up, he lets her in, and she's like, "Hey, the light thing didn't work, I've been looking up some alternative ideas, what do you want to do?" And Mark's like, "Hey, I'm already trying something different." And she's like, "What? No, you don't get to do this on your own." So Devon gets kind of hurt that he's keeping a secret, basically. But then the reintegration gets to him, the process that he's just went through gets to him. We get lots of sound effects where everything's muffled, like his hearing's going, and he collapses, right? So things don't look so good for Mark. And Azelle runs up and doesn't care that Devon's there at this point. She just kind of like, hey, we have to help him. So we kind of end on a cliffhanger with Mark of him being in a pretty bad shape. So we'll see how that pans out next time. I suspect Devon's going to have some words for both him and Azelle. Or Azelle? I honestly, like, I said this in the other, the lost version of this review, but they never say her name enough. Like, honestly, in my head, I always think Doctor Lady, but it feels bad to say that in a review, so I get the name from IMDb, but I really wish they'd say her name a bit more. Anyway, so that was the Mark plot. Wonderful, basically from start to finish. Everything with any Mark and Helly, phenomenal. Everything with outie Mark and Helena, arguably even a little bit more phenomenal, depending on what you appreciate a bit more. But loved all of it. And that's only one, I mean, that's the bulk, I would say, but like there's still two other like main characters. Well, actually, no, three, because Milchick's on his own. Milchick's doing his own stuff. I was thinking it's just Irving and Dylan's plots next, but like, yeah, Milchick's there too. I mean, his plot's not as big this episode, but he's absolutely got his own stuff to do. I'll just mention him first. Let's get out of the way. He's fixing his paperclip problems. Remember his performance review? They told him that some of his documents had the paperclip round the wrong way, like the petty assholes they are. He goes into the failing room. He gave Miss Hong like, hey, I'm going to be gone for the rest of the day, so you go do that. He also interestingly mentioned that she's here on a fellowship, so she's like maybe like a kid from like a rich family who goes to a hoity-toity place that would get an internship effectively from Lumen or something. I'm curious to see how they develop that a little bit more. But he does point out though that she could stay at her own desk. She doesn't get to sit at his desk, so he's been a little bit petty on that front. But everything from like the performance from Tramell Tillman here is great. Like when she comes in and he's sitting there at the desk and she's like, "How was your performance review?" And he's like, "They brought up some justifiable concerns. I look forward to addressing them." Something to that effect. So he's pure Milchick, but of course by the end of his little story that kind of wraps up about halfway through. Basically, we get his story while we're doing any stuff, but then once we're on the outie stuff, there's no Milchick anymore this episode. Unless I'm forgetting how it was structured, but I think that's how it played out. He goes through and does like paper clips. He got a big jar. And I was laughing actually a little bit because it was intercutting with him and the romance stuff that was happening. And it was intercutting from like a romance moment or whatever it was, or a tense, like dramatic moment between two characters. And it cut to him looking at a jar of paper clips. And that really made me laugh. And I think it's intentional in a lot of ways because it's basically showing that whilst the other characters, it's the people who are lower down on the totem pole are having like moments of discovery, and they're going through things that are making them feel things, and they're growing as people. He is putting paper clips on files, like dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of them. But that's definitely hundreds, because he goes like halfway down that jar by the time he's done, and his hand is shaking at the end. But I kind of like this idea of like he has to do this like extended menial task. Now I don't know if like he has to go do this, or if this is him like making an effort because he feels he has to because of the complaints he got. But he looks at the booklet they gave him, and he's like, okay, I've addressed the paper clips, I've done that, and his hand is shaking, like he's trembling because he's trembling. Tillman, I'm sorry, that was a bad joke. I'm moving on. Right, he's he's shaking. He's clearly like pushed himself, even though it's a pretty simple task. He's done so much of it so quickly that it's had an effect on him. And then he tries to address number one, the complaint, which was that he uses too many big words. And this was a really cool little moment, I thought, because he goes over to the mirror and he says something the way he would say it. Right? I can't even begin to remember the quote. I'm not going to try. But he kind of gets a little like higher tempered or hotter tempered and starts just changing it to simpler language. Whereas like you have to leave childish things behind. You have to grow up. Right? That's what it becomes. And he kind of says that a few times, and he's kind of saying it with a bit of anger at the mirror. Like, I kind of like this moment in a weird way, because it's fascinating to me that this felt like he was killing who he is. Right? This is like the classic Severance, in a way. Old school Severance, which is just to beat the life out of your employees and turn them into the innies in the more natural sense, as opposed to little chips that literally do it. But this idea that, because Milchick in season 1 represented, like in a lot of ways, he represented the corporate side of things. Yes, we had Cobell, of course, who was a bit more ominous, but he always did the thing where he spoke in that super, uses the big words, but he spoke in a very kind of upbeat way that felt phony, and it kind of felt like it represented company, it represented corporate policy, and all that kind of thing. And it's really fascinating to me that here, him being forced to stamp that out of his speech and speak like how they want him to, feels like they're making him kill something that makes him Milchick. Because maybe that wasn't like something the company demanded that he do in season 1, was speak like that. That's something that he thought, oh, this is what I should do because this is proper. This is something I can do to get ahead. And, like he was trying to be a good employee. He was trying to show that he was management material by doing what he thought they would like, by upping his game and speaking in a very kind of like, articulate manner. And instead, he's told that he's overstepped, that he has to dumb it down because it's too big, it's too pretentious, don't be you. And here he is fixing that mistake by forcing himself to say it in the mirror. And it feels very demeaning. It feels degrading that he's having to do this with himself. Like the thing that he probably taught himself to be like in the first place, to make it in this world. And he's been told, no, that you've went too far. We don't like that. Get back in your place. And I think the underlying kind of thing with Milchick this season is the exploration of seeing how maybe he is specifically treated by the company as a person of color, right? And that was something he tried to talk to Natalie about last episode. And this idea that he has been kind of put back into his place and how much of a toll that is taking on him. The idea that he might want to rebel against the company at some point. If that is what happens, the moment he decides to help Mark or whoever, could be one of the best like character turn moments in a TV show. Just like I was saying, like it's a big deal that Helena showed up to the restaurant without a mark. I think a moment where Milchick, breaks free and says, "No, I'm going to do what I think is right. F this company." That could be like a nuclear moment as far as storytelling goes in this show. So as much as his stuff was relatively contained this episode, it was fascinating what we got of it. So great stuff. His performance is fantastic. Love it. Wonderful stuff. Let's talk about Dylan, who is having another conjugal visit with the wife. And it's pretty clear that they're going to end up at least kissing at the end of this scene, because he gets kind of loving about it. He talks about how, he wishes he could be there and like spend all of his time with her. And she kind of awkwardly says, I mean, you do, he does. And, they're talking about how he keeps looking to look for a new hobby. He's always going through phases, whatever. But he specifically says, I wish I could just talk to you about our offspring and stare at your face, which sounds a little bit like a weird line, but it comes across very kind of genuine. It's a very kind of, he's kind of been adorable here. And I think she takes it that way. And he eventually says, hey, can we try the hug again? I like the hugging. And she's like, okay. And again, it's very slow. She doesn't say yes quickly. It's a very slow, drawn out kind of thing. But once they're hugging, we cut away to other love stuff going on. And thematically, everything was clicking together this episode, because it was, Helly and Mark stuff was happening as this kiss was happening, and Milchick with his paper clips. But yeah, they kiss, right? And the more fascinating part of it is probably later on when we see her with the outie version of Dylan, and she lies about even seeing him. Even though she was supposed to see any Dylan, on some level, there's a guilt associated with it, or maybe even it's not a guilt. I mean, I could be reading into that too much. It could be more, oh, this is nicer if he doesn't even, if the outie version that I've lost the romance with doesn't even know that I'm seeing him. But that's what happens. She lies about even seeing him. She says the company cancelled the meeting and she never saw him, but they were smooching, which arguably is just going to make Dylan more conflicted about helping the others try and, figure things out and get out or explore and, expose what the company's doing. Expose was the word I was looking for there. I said like 3 other things first, but expose was the word that I was actually trying to hit on. So, yeah, and that was basically it. That was actually quite quick that I'm talking about it out loud, but it was effective, right? It really set up this core idea which was seeded previously with their prior meeting, that she is more attracted to the innie version because he has not got all the baggage, and the romance, the way he looks at her is probably the way that outie Dylan once looked at her, and that is probably making her feel lots of feelings. And she has to wrestle with this idea that they're both kind of the same person, but not really, and should she feel guilty of that? Compare it to what happened with Helly and Helena, right? With the sex with Mark, and now consider, like, is she doing something wrong? I mean, obviously, it's less wrong in the sense that, like, any Dylan knows who she is and understands the context of what is happening, but the idea that outie Dylan is being cheated on and doesn't know is really quite interesting. So, yeah, that's all. So that leaves us, of course, with the Irving, Burt, and Fields plot, which kickstarts in the back half of the episode, and we get this dinner that was set up previously. Bunch of interesting little things here, of course. There's the philosophical discussion about how the church views Severance. The church considers both innies and outies to be different souls. And the conversation about how Burt became severed because he was a bit of a bad boy growing up, and that maybe the innie would grant him access to heaven. And even the idea of sex comes up when Fields asks, like, is there any way you two could have had unprotected sex when you were in the office? And he wants to talk about this stuff. And it's a bit awkward. Burt kind of tries to talk him down, so on and so on. But yeah, it's worth asking. And, it's possible it could have happened and they'd have no idea. It's possible there could be evidence, signs that they could maybe notice that would suggest maybe it did happen, but it could be completely unknown to them if they did. Now, obviously, we don't think they did. I don't think anything indicated to us that physical stuff that to that extent had happened, but still, interesting thing to bring up. But of course, what we really want to talk about here is the mysteries that are kind of expanded upon, and like, I mean, at this point, like Burt is probably just evil, right? He's a bad guy, is the guess. Now, how much of a bad guy is he? Is it just the outie? And is there even an outie in any? Like, part of me is even thinking by the end of this episode that Burt was just always pretending, and it been differently to Helly in that he was always like he always, from the first day he went down there, he was always not. And the reason why I'm saying this, right? So the part of the conversation that opened up the speculation, the flood, the dam broke, is a conversation about how they stopped using the word hun to say, as in honey, they say hun, hey hun, and it switched to Attila, as in Attila the Hun, right? And it's like a funny little joke that they have, and that's obviously where the title of the episode comes from. But John Noble's character Fields, the husband, he mentions that there's a specific conversation where that changed, and it happened 20 years ago. However, it is pointed out that doesn't make sense because Severance, in the context of everything else they've said, it doesn't make sense that that's the case because Severance has only been around for 12 years, right? The first severed office opened up 12 years ago. And Burt kind of plays it off as, he gets fuzzy, he's been drinking, and sort of tries to steer the conversation back. And, Christopher Walken's given all these glances, which you could read as like flirtation towards Irving, but there's a kind of a sinister undertone behind them. Really quite cool stuff here from just enjoying the performances. But so here's the thing. There's two possibilities that spring to mind from this, right? This whole he's fuzzy, he gets confused. Option one is that is a lie, that he is just saying what happened, and that this did happen 20 years ago, which would clearly indicate that Burt was working at Lumen before Severance was a public thing, and that he's probably important at the company. Perhaps he's on the board. We've never seen the board, right? It makes sense they would all be old people. Maybe he's like the scientist who actually, or one of the scientists who actually cracked Severance in the first place. Maybe he's like one of the masterminds behind the whole thing. That's kind of the first thing I thought. The other thing I thought, though, is that that Fields is fuzzy. He has gotten a little confused, and maybe that indicates that Burt, still being a bad guy, kinda, is maybe like experimented on him. Like he is like done, like the early Severance things were done to Fields, and it's left him kind of broken in some ways. Because in the same way that reintegration is not going very smooth right now because it's kind of new, or at least on the outside it's kind of new for the people who are trying to do it. Who's to say that Severance, when they first started experimenting with it, was going smoothly? There might have been lots of failures and lots of like bad side effects and all sorts of things until they actually got it working right. So that's something to consider. But either way, it felt like, okay, we're dealing with some juicy stuff here, and I think that both of them in some capacity are involved with Lumen. And I think the end of season 1 made us feel like, because we know Burt and we care about Burt and Irving, we almost like subconsciously kind of villainize the husband character because he's the new one and he's like the threat to like the romance we know. But I think this episode kind of painted Fields as the more innocent one potentially. I mean, they might both be evil. Obviously, that's entirely a possibility. But it kind of made me feel like Burt is really manipulating things here. His flirtation with Irving at the end also felt like manipulation to me. His look at, of course, the final shot where he looks at him from the door felt very sinister. And of course, all of this is over the top of the fact that it feels like this dinner was designed to let Drummond go and search Irving's apartment so he could find all of the research he's compiled on Severance, on Lumen, on key personnel, all that kind of stuff. So it feels like Outie Irving's in a bit of trouble here, and that they're on to him, and that if Burt is important at the company, he's on the board, and he's like calling some shots, it makes sense that he would like, set this up, and he would order this, even maybe whilst also having some feelings of some kind for Irving. Now, again, has he ever actually been severed? that's, you know, I almost want to go back and watch season 1 again and watch all their interactions and see if they have a different tone, if I'm assuming that he's actually pretending to be severed. I think that's very interesting to me. But yeah, there's a lot to dig in there. I think that was not an accident. That was not something we should just gloss over. That little moment where Fields says something that factually shouldn't be correct because of when Severance started, I think implies a lot of things about how involved these guys are, or at least how involved Burt is at Lumen, and how like long they were like tinkering with Severance before it became a public thing. I wouldn't be surprised if we get the story at some point about like what happened to the first people they tried to do it with and how badly it went. I would very much be inclined to see that story at some point. Maybe a special episode that's all, you know, the first severed person or something. But all this was phenomenal. I loved this episode. It's full of great character stuff, great science fiction exploration of how do you manage these personal relationships that are so complex because of the core sci-fi concept that turns one person into two different people, and this tangling between them all that is all easy to follow because they've set all this up wonderfully and it all makes sense to us, the audience. And then you've got all this teasing as well with Burt being important to the company. So super excited. Loved it quite a bit. So let me know what you thought of this episode of Severance in the comments below. Always excited to see other theories and other little moments I maybe didn't mention that maybe stuck out to you more. But yeah, like, subscribe, all the usual stuff helps. And of course, you can support everything on Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, and help keep all the reviews coming, both here and all the podcasts over at MailFuzz Movies. So thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?